Thanks, Rona. I get the impression I can only speak for 15 minutes, which is actually a bit difficult for me because usually it takes me that long to introduce myself. So I will talk quite quickly. What I'm going to talk about today is just one example of our move away from the mandatory intervention targets we had for about 10 years to what Roger Beale called risk return. And the example I'm going to talk about is how we stopped inspecting the outside of every sea container that came into the country to inspecting those which we assessed as having the highest risk. And it's quite an interesting case study really, because it doesn't only deal with biosecurity risk, but also with political risks, perception risks, and communication risks. So it's quite a complex process we had to go through. Now, in the beginning, you might remember in 2001, there were horrific pictures of cattle in England on large funeral pyres because of the foot and mouth outbreak. Australia instituted a very visible set of quarantine controls in response to that outbreak. And by 2002, we were inspecting the outside of each and every sea and air container that arrived in Australia, and that was what we called the external container inspection regime. By 2009, we were examining over 2 million sea containers every year. So why look at sea containers? Well, the first bit was, as I said, we were seen to be doing something, but they do actually carry risks with them. They can harbour a wide range of materials that get on there by accident, soil, plant material. There are insect hitchhikers which can get into the crevices there. We're concerned about things like red imported fire ants, honeybees, various beetles, Asian gypsy moth, all of which could have an impact on our environment or on our agricultural industries. Snails are a risk, the giant African snail in particular. And without going into any detail about that, I'm pretty well reliably informed that they eat everything except cane toads, which is one of the reasons we don't want them there. And if you've never seen one, they can go the size of a football, but they come in much smaller than that. So, in that period between 2002 and 2009, we inspected the outside of every sea container that arrived in Australia. It did employ a lot of people. It was visible, but it had its downsides. It had an impact on the supply chain. There were high costs to it. And really, we were seen to be doing something, but the question that we asked, was this a really good way of managing the risks? And our view was it was based on what is essentially a flawed premise, that if you look at everything, you'll find everything. In 2008, Roger Beale delivered his report, One Biosecurity, a Working Partnership, and that built on the earlier NAN review of the late 90s and quite strongly argued that we should have a more risk-based approach to how we manage biosecurity. So one of the challenges that we had was how we moved away from what was really quite an emotive and visibly risk-averse approach where we looked at everything, and how we could move to a more scientifically based, more properly risk-assessed approach. And one of the problems in that is we had had 10 years of being very successful in convincing everyone that everything that came into the country was dangerous and we had to look at everything. So that meant that the move away from 100% inspection was never going to be easy. So the first step for us really was to do the analysis. We basically, if you'll pardon the pun, unpacked the data of over 5 million containers that we'd inspected and looked at all the organisms that we'd collected from those container inspections, because we had found on there animal and plant material and soil. And what we discovered is that only a tiny proportion of that was actually of any actual biosecurity risk. And when we drilled through the figures, there was something of potential risk on 1 in every 17,500 containers. And the other thing that's notable there, in most cases, it was a single organism. So the real likelihood was it was going to die a very lonely death. We also looked at assumptions about foot and mouth transmission, which had been the alarm which had instigated this in the first place. And really all the science said that it was extremely unlikely that there'd be enough bovine fecal matter that stayed moist on a container that came into the country that was then going to go into a rural area and then be touched or go near a cow for it to cause an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in the country. And, you know, the international facts are, in all the years that there have been movements of cargo by sea containers, and that would amount to millions of cargo container movements, not a single example anywhere of foot and mouth being spread by container movements. So what we needed to do was really start focusing on what mattered most, where the containers were coming from, and where they were going to. And another factor we built into that, and there's a couple of points on the screen, was the fact that in the years we'd been doing this and working with industry, the compliance levels were greatly improved. So containers were much cleaner than they had been early on. We had to send very few in for washing. There was a high degree of awareness by the people involved in the cargo supply chain. There was a reduction in detections. Now, while the data that we had may seem convincing in itself, the job that we had in convincing other people wasn't easy. And in some ways we were victims of our own good marketing over the years about the importance of the job we were doing at the border. So to help us get through the message that we needed to get through, we enlisted the help of a range of people to help explain what we were doing and why. And one very important collaborator in this was the Australian Centre for Excellence in Risk Assessment, who did some very detailed statistical analysis to basically assist us in designing what were appropriate intervention levels to give us a degree of confidence that we would intercept risk material, what were the levels of verification we needed to have a good sense that our approaches were being effective. We talked to our staff and they helped us designing brochures and informing industry, doing questions and answers. And to be honest, they weren't all happy. Some of them perhaps saw this being a threat to their jobs. Others were concerned that they'd spent a number of years and had been employed to do a job, and we were now saying that we thought there was a better way of doing it and that what they'd been doing was perhaps not the best way of managing the risk.